This program contains some distressing scenes and images of sexual activity.
He started as a reformer vowing to defend democracy.
Свобода слова, свобода совести, свобода средств массовой информации, права собственности. Эти основополагающие элементы цивилизованного общества будут надежно защищены государством.
He turned into a dictator threatening humanity.
Если кем-то принято решение уничтожить Россию, тогда у нас возникает законное право ответить. Да, для человечества это будет глобальная катастрофа. Для мира будет глобальная катастрофа. Но я все-таки как гражданин России и глава российского государства тогда хочу задаться вопросом, а зачем нам такой мир, если там не будет России?
How did it come to this, and how much further will Putin go? This is a story 2 decades in the making.
Eric Campbell, ABC News, Moscow.
In 1999, I was living in Russia as the ABC's Moscow correspondent when a man few Russians had even heard of suddenly came to power. The appointment of Vladimir Putin as Prime Minister, and within months his anointment as President, was a shock and a mystery. Was this former KGB spy really a Democrat, as his backers claimed, or a hardliner? Was he a potential friend of the West, as diplomats hoped, or an inevitable enemy? Well, for more than 20 years, I've been following his rule as the world tried to work out who he really was.
Если вы сейчас не сыграете хорошо...
Внимание! Тишина! Мотор!
It's hard to imagine now, but when Putin first emerged, Russians could ridicule their rulers. In early 2000, I visited the set of one of the most popular TV programs, Kukli, meaning puppets. For years, they had made fun of the feeble and apparently alcoholic president, Boris Yeltsin. Now they were wrestling with a new rubbery figure who'd just been named acting president. Their director, Grigory Lubomirov, admitted they were struggling.
С начала этого нового года, нового века, нового тысячелетия у России новый руководитель. И так же, как для западных людей, так же и для России, человек не очень известный, не очень знакомый.
Their first idea was to make him the evil Mr. Hyde to Yeltsin's Dr. Jekyll. Later, they settled on a young but menacing Napoleon.
Вы, кажется, хотели что-то сказать?
Да.
Ну, смелей же, смелей. Со мной вы можете быть совершенно откровенны.
I'd been living in Russia for 4 years, watching a country struggle with its newfound freedom.
Извините, Михаил Сергеевич, а советское телевидение можно назвать небольшое интервью?
The last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, had overseen the collapse of the Soviet Union into 15 separate countries. Boris Yeltsin was steering Russia from communism to capitalist democracy, and it was a wild ride. The state had nearly fallen apart as Western-backed reformers sold off public assets on the cheap. A few grew astonishingly rich, while most struggled to survive, wondering why their superpower was now a beggar state. Suddenly, a shadowy bureaucrat was promising to make Russia great again. In a report for Foreign Correspondent, I traced Putin's unremarkable origins in post-war Leningrad, now renamed St. Petersburg. I visited the shabby communal apartment where he grew up. Then, as now, 3 families shared one toilet and one stove. I went to his old school, where his teacher told me she barely remembered him.
Его все же вспомнила, хотя долгое время не могла вспомнить. Вот меня спрашивают, учила я или не учила Путина, я говорю, ну не могу вспомнить, 30 лет прошло. Володя Путин не был лидером. Он не был лидером.
Nor did he appear to be a Democrat. After studying law, he joined the ruthless Soviet spy agency, the KGB. His job disappeared with the collapse of the Soviet Union, but his old law lecturer threw him a lifeline. Professor Anatoly Sobchak was now the liberal mayor of St. Petersburg and hired young Vladimir as his deputy.
Это человек, который понимает, что такое рыночная экономика, что такое частная собственность.
Но Путин был из КГБ. КГБ был враг демократии.
Вы знаете, и в КГБ работали разные люди, и в КГБ работали люди, которые заботились о государстве, о своей стране. Таким офицерам КГБ, офицерам разведки принадлежит Путин.
Putin's lucky break would change history. The KGB veteran proved adept at capitalism, managing the city's property deals, many of them with a stench of corruption. Putin's loyal discretion gained the attention of Yeltsin, who made him head of the KGB's domestic successor, the FSB. And it was here that he really proved his worth. Yeltsin's family was facing a corruption investigation. In what seemed a classic KGB sting, the chief prosecutor, Yuri Skuratov, was filmed with 2 prostitutes, and the tape was leaked to TV. Putin publicly authenticated the video, ending the corruption investigation.
Мое мнение по этому вопросу известно. Оно соответствует мнению президента и премьер-министра страны. Юрий Ильич должен уйти в отставку.
Weeks later, Yeltsin named Putin prime minister and preferred successor.
The immediate reaction was shock and disbelief. The ruble fell sharply and the stock market plunged 10%. Few analysts give the Yeltsin loyalist much chance of winning the presidential elections. Many suspect a darker agenda.
Putin would soon make himself highly electable.
Police have not yet ruled out foul play in this disaster.
Apartment blocks started toppling across Russia. Prime Minister Putin blamed terrorists from the breakaway Republic of Chechnya and mounted a full-scale invasion. Thousands of civilians were killed in Chechnya.
But this is a popular war in Russia. Most blame Chechens for recent terrorist bombings that killed almost 300 people. And all the while, the military build-up continues. Concerns about the civilian carnage is having no effect whatsoever on the conduct of this war.
The apparent success on the battlefield gave Putin the popularity he needed. In March 2000, he won what would prove to be Russia's last relatively free presidential election. The Putin era had begun. A year into Putin's presidency, the Kukli program was wrestling with a new problem. It had boldly continued to satirize Putin and his unpopular administration.
Еще проблемы тут со светом и теплом.
С чем?
С теплом и светом.
Какие?
Ни тепла, ни света нету.
Putin's office was now demanding they stop using the Putin puppets.
Ведь вы же говорили...
Путина, которого вы видите сегодня, это четвертый вариант Путина. На наш взгляд, он просто душевный, милый, привлекательный человек. И мы удивляемся, почему он не нравится президенту. Это открытый взгляд, голубых глаз. Очень, по-моему, приятное лицо.
The government had begun a crackdown on all independent media, starting with Kukli's station, NTV. Authorities had mounted dozens of raids, interrogating hundreds of staff. I spent a week at the station as the Kremlin tried to install its own management.
Журналистский коллектив не признает законным новое руководство и намерен отстаивать свою позицию, а также свободу слова до конца. Сейчас идет...
The Kremlin insists it's simply an investigation of financial fraud, but it could see the Kremlin take over Russia's last independent television network. Many here fear it marks the beginning of the end of Russian democracy.
NTV's general director, Yevgeny Kiselyov, said Putin was showing his true colours.
Yes, I think that Mr. Putin is not a Democrat and not a liberal. And I'm quite convinced that Mr. Putin is an opportunist. You can have NTV shut down, or at least taken over, so that NTV would not report about corruption, crime, drugs, Chechen war. You will have virtual reality, as if everything is okay, everything's fine.
Putin already had that virtual reality in Parliament. The remnants of the Communist Party, a determined foe of Boris Yeltsin, had sensed the change of wind and fallen into line behind Putin. The only real opposition left was a small liberal party, Yabloko, led by Grigory Yavlinsky. He told me Putin was sending a message to all media.
It's enough to make a demonstration. It's enough to give the example. It's enough to make a strong and well-known precedent. And then everything is made in the same way, easily.
Yavlinsky made a stand for NTV and failed.
В истории останется уничтожение свободы слова.
NTV was swallowed up by the Kremlin. Kiselyov and the rebel journalists were sacked. With television now under Putin's control, he was able to shape the message. Russia was growing stronger. The humiliation of the 1990s was over. In the 2003 parliamentary elections, Yabloko failed to win a single seat. Grigory Yavlinsky told me he wouldn't even bother voting in the next presidential election.
We failed to explain to the voters that the democracy can be real. They don't believe anymore.
Putin was becoming more a czar than a president. The Russian Orthodox Church had thrown its full support behind the Kremlin. Father Vsevolod, the spokesman for the Moscow Patriarch, welcomed the opposition's demise.
The liberal opposition only exists in the Western media. I am very much surprised that even 1% of the population has supported certain of the extreme liberal protests. In fact, they totally failed.
What's more, he told me their failure was a blessing. Western democracy being alien to Russian tradition.
If a society is divided along the commercial interests or political convictions. It's illness. It's not a creative conflict. And we always opt for unity of the society.
Putin wasn't taking any chances. He'd formed a Putin youth group to target opposition rallies. It was a response to youth-led colour revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine that had brought pro-Western leaders to power. At a summer camp, these young counter-revolutionaries were even given military training. Putin held forth to them on a growing obsession: Western attempts to weaken Russia.
Мозги им надо поменять, а не конституцию нашу. Мозги. И я скажу почему. Потому что то, что они предлагают, это очевидный рудимент колониального мышления.
With democracy out of the way, Putin was starting to move on his real agenda, restoring Russian might. In 2005, he'd made a stunning speech revealing his nostalgia for the Soviet Union.
Прежде всего следует признать, и об этом я уже говорил, что крушение Советского Союза было крупнейшей геополитической катастрофой века. Для российского же народа оно стало настоящей драмой. Десятки миллионов наших сограждан и соотечественников оказались за пределами российской территории.
It wasn't Soviet communism he missed. Like the Russian Orthodox Church, he was pining for the Russian Empire.
Not the Soviet Union, but the historical Russia, with dozens of millions of people who are speaking Russian, who are Russians, remaining nowadays in other states. This is a national catastrophe.
Russia still had a democratic constitution with a two-term limit for the presidency. But that was a technicality Putin easily overcame, putting forward his protege and gym buddy, Dmitry Medvedev, to take over for a term while Putin ruled as prime minister.
Главное для развития нашей страны – это продолжение спокойного и стабильного развития.
As expected, Medvedev would be Putin's puppet until he could formally resume the presidency 4 years later. Putin would continue to have vocal critics, but one by one they would meet untimely ends. By 2011, Russia's last independent newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, had a sickening tally of murdered reporters. 6 had been poisoned, beaten to death or shot, including chief investigative reporter Anna Politkovskaya, gunned down outside her Moscow apartment.
Here she was sitting when she was alive and working in Novaya Gazeta. It wasn't really...
Yelena Milashna took over her role and the target on her back that came with it, and would later have to flee the country.
I feel angry. I'm not feeling any fear anymore. I have to do what I have to and let it be what it be. So that's the country. It's not the paper. It's not that I will be safe if I quit with journalism. Nobody is safe in this country. The difference between people and me is that I understand that.
I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill.
growing number of dead critics hadn't stopped Putin being feted as an intriguing, even sexy world leader. At this 2010 charity event in St. Petersburg, he was joined by Hollywood celebrities like Goldie Hawn, Sharon Stone and Monica Bellucci.
We'll see what we shall see.
On state TV, he was regularly taking his shirt off, posing as an alpha male He-Man in a world of insipid liberals. But against the odds, some liberals were still risking all to oppose him. Among them, the man once tipped to be Yeltsin's successor.
Я считаю, что мы точно добьемся справедливости. Я считаю, что Путина надо отправить в отставку. Россия должна быть без Путина. Россия без Путина. Россия без Путина. Долой власть воров! Долой власть воров!
Boris Nemtsov was Yeltsin's deputy prime minister, but he'd just done jail time for unauthorized protests.
Mr. Nemtsov, 12 years ago, many people said you would be president. Instead, Mr. Putin got the job and he's just put you in jail. Do you regret the way things have turned out?
Ельцин ошибся. Он перепутал преемника.
4 years later, Nemtsov was shot dead while strolling past the Kremlin. There was still one opposition politician who Putin feared, so much so that state TV was ordered to never even mention his name.
Я отказываюсь слушать эти рассказы о том, что мы должны еще здесь, знаете, затянуть свои пояса. Вы хотите затягивать пояс? И я не хочу. Я иду на выборы, объединяя этих людей. Я вот езжу из города в город и говорю, ребят, хватит терпеть. Сколько мы будем ждать?
Alexei Navalny was no Western-style liberal. He had been expelled from the Yabloko party for his hardline nationalist views and even supported Putin's annexation of Crimea. The government had banned him from running for president through a bogus fraud conviction. He told me it didn't matter.
Правительство говорит, что вы не можете стать кандидатом до 2022 году. Что делать?
Правительство предпочло бы, чтобы я вообще никогда не был кандидатом, вообще не участвовал ни в какой избирательной кампании, вообще не занимался никакими антикоррупционными расследованиями. Мне не интересует, что думает правительство, потому что я иду на эти выборы для того, чтобы сменить правительство, для того, чтобы отстранить этих людей от власти.
What drove Navalny and his popularity was outrage at Kremlin corruption. Navalny's team flew drones over the walled estates of Putin's inner circle, exposing the world-class theft of Putinists like the stunt president Dmitry Medvedev.
О, эти дьявольские хитрецы из Кремля. Летим назад. Общая площадь резиденции более 80 гектаров. Это почти как 3 Кремля, ну или 30 красных площадей. Ее рыночную стоимость мы даже и оценить не можем. Реконструкция старинной усадьбы, несколько домов, бассейны, гостиница, лыжный склон, подземные объекты. Мы предполагаем, что возвести такой комплекс стоит не меньше 25-30 миллиардов рублей. Вот, кстати, доска для гигантских шахмат. На ней и сам Дмитрий Медведев может быть королем и крушить непокорные фигуры.
Tens of millions watched Navalny's weekly YouTube programs. Until suddenly, like many Putin critics, death came knocking.
We're getting reports that opposition politician Alexei Navalny is in a coma in a Siberian hospital.
Amazingly, he survived what turned out to be poisoning by Novichok, a Russian military nerve agent.
Здрасте, меня зовут Устинов Максим Сергеевич. Я помощник Николая Платоновича Патрушева.
Recuperating in Germany, he pulled off one of the most astonishing stings in spy history, cold calling the FSB hit team assigned to poison him. He tricked one of them into confessing how they tried to remove the evidence.
Хорошо, скажите мне, пожалуйста, какой предмет одежды, на какой предмет одежды главный был акцент? У нас самый рискованный в теории предмет одежды какой?
Трусы.
Трусы.
Ну, по внутренним работали. Ну, по крайней мере, там это обработку делали.
Maria Pevchik is the head of his investigations team.
To be honest, that was the most unbelievable day in my career.
Their next coup was releasing an investigation into a Black Sea palace they alleged belonged to Putin.
Шато, винные заводы, устричные фермы и бесконечная роскошь.
He had apparently come a long way from a crowded communal apartment in Leningrad.
We have investigated his history and how ownership changed to prove that this palace has been built for Vladimir Putin by his friends, by the oligarchs. And the place is so expensive that it is probably the biggest bribe ever given in the history of bribing.
Navalny bravely returned to Russia and was thrown in jail. Foreign correspondent filmed the massive protests that erupted across Russia. At his trial, off-camera but recorded on a mobile phone, Navalny delivered what may be the greatest put-down of the Russian century. Navalny was now silenced, but he had shown what Putin perhaps fears most: people who fight to the bitter end, who don't fear Putin. Putin's obsession with obedience was on stark display in February, when he forced his Security Council to publicly back his plans for Ukraine. His spy chief could barely speak without stammering.
Говорите прямо.
Я поддержу предложение о признании.
Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей.
Поддерживаю предложение.
Так и скажите, да или нет.
Да. Поддерживаю предложение.
I couldn't help but think back to the Kukli program in 2000, when they portrayed him as Napoleon.
Вы, кажется, хотели что-то сказать?
Да.
Like Napoleon, Putin has embarked on a war of conquest to redraw the map of Europe. And like the French emperor, he's made himself ruler for life.
Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались.
Putin's invasion of Ukraine is the culmination of his dream to rebuild a Russian empire that once stretched across Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, and the Baltics.
No charisma, no nothing.
Yekaterina Kodrikatsa is one of Russia's leading journalists and, like many, has chosen exile to have the freedom to keep reporting.
He doesn't care about anyone. Civilians in Georgia, members of Russian army, Russian soldiers, has never been a problem for this person. So any amount of victims is all right for him, as we can see right now in Ukraine.
But like Napoleon invading Russia, he has found in Ukraine an enemy who doesn't fear him and won't surrender. The Putin we see today is a different man to the opaque bureaucrat I saw emerge in 1999, claiming to support free speech and democracy. And he's not the same figure who once paraded shirtless to prove his masculine strength against weak Western rivals. Nearing 70, he is suddenly looking old, his face mysteriously bloated, his health a matter of open speculation. Many hope this accidental president will soon pass into history after an improbably long rule. We can only hope his nuclear weapons don't turn Russia's tragedy into a nightmare for us all.
"70 years on the throne, celebrations across Britain and the Commonwealth for Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. Pain in the wallet, the new Energy Minister's dire warning about power prices. Former Hey Dad star and pedophile Robert Hughes to be deported to the UK. And a US jury finds Johnny Depp was defamed by his ex-wife, Amber Heard. Hello, Michael Tetlow with ABC Late News. Queen Elizabeth has waved to cheering crowds outside Buckingham Palace as Britain kicked off 4 days of parties and parades to celebrate her record-breaking 70 years on the throne. The Queen appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace some hours after the trooping of the colour began. Despite recent mobility issues, the 96-year-old walked unassisted into view, standing as she watched the ceremony being held in her honour. Earlier, the arrival of the first senior royals, Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, her 3 young children, and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, were met with loud cheers. Princes Charles and William and Princess Anne arrived on horseback. Millions of people across Britain and the world are set to join the festivities in honour of the monarch, who's reigned for longer than any of her predecessors. And not long after appearing on the balcony, the Queen was joined by members of her family, led by Prince Charles, Camilla, William, Kate and their 3 young children. In a statement, the Queen said she continued to be inspired by the goodwill shown towards her and hopes in the coming days there will be an opportunity to reflect on all that's been achieved during the past 70 years as the nation and the world looks to the future with confidence and enthusiasm. The balcony appearance came to a crescendo as a military flyover held the attention of people not only on the street but also the family at Buckingham Palace. The crowds cheered as the royals watched a fly past by both modern and historic Royal Air Force aircraft. As the extended family, notably minus Princes Harry and Andrew, enjoyed the show above the Mall, the Queen's great-grandchildren waved at the planes as they roared overhead, and why wouldn't you? That looks like a lot of fun for that young man. A flying formation created a number 70 in the sky, and the Red Arrows released the red, white and blue of the Union Jack. In Canberra this evening, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese lit a beacon to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee on the shore of Lake Burley-Griffin. The event is one of over 50 planned lightings in Commonwealth capital cities, set to take place on this anniversary of the Queen's reign. To other news now, and gas companies are being accused of using the war in Ukraine to unjustifiably boost their profits on Australia's east coast. The Albanese government says it won't rule out any action to bring gas prices down and will convene a crisis meeting of the nation's energy ministers next week. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
Gas is big business in Australia, enormous in fact. But being the world's top exporter of liquefied natural gas has proven to be no guarantee of cheap or reliable domestic supply.
If there was an easy, quick way to fix these serious challenges we have with energy prices right now, our government would have reached for it already.
The war in Ukraine has pushed up the price of commodities worldwide. Not that this explains everything in the Australian gas market.
Australians are paying through the nose for gas that they own because there is a gas export cartel that is war profiteering on the suffering of the Ukrainians.
In WA, where the state government mandates that 15% of gas be set aside for domestic use, gas is $5.50 a gigajoule. It's almost 8 times more expensive elsewhere in Australia.
The East must do what the West has long done.
This is the consequence of more than a decade of energy policy failure that has stopped the industry developing more gas supply in a timely manner.
Gas prices would be even higher on the East Coast were it not for the regulator enforcing a cap after wholesale prices spiked 50-fold.
The Albanese Labor government will take whatever action is necessary to ensure ongoing reliability and affordability for the energy markets, particularly on the East Coast.
Among the government's options is the so-called gas trigger, which would force exporters to release gas into the local market.
It's not an easy trigger to pull, and if it was pulled today, it would have absolutely no impact until the 1st of January anyway.
Are you going to pick up the phone and tell Shell and Origin, for example, and remind them of their social licence? Are you going to speak to the chief executive?
Minister King is doing that today.
That's Madeleine King, the new Resources Minister.
If the ACCC needs to take action, they will have our full support. If the Australian Energy Regulator needs to take action, they will have our full support.
Labor came to office promising cheaper power bills, so this energy crisis will be the first test of its resolve. Chris Bowen will convene a meeting of energy ministers next week. Recent history tells us an effective strategy would be using the authority and persuasion of government to jawbone gas company executives into lowering their prices. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The surging gas prices have the manufacturing industry on the brink of disaster. Industry groups are calling for urgent government intervention, warning businesses could shut down if prices continue to skyrocket.
Australia's largest plastics manufacturer has been hit hard by soaring energy costs. About 40% of Qenos's gas supply is bought on the open market.
Prices have gone up in the spot market 300 to 400%. This isn't just an issue for manufacturers, it's also an issue for consumers.
The boss says if prices don't come down, it won't just be 750 jobs at his company that are on the line.
And if we don't have competitive inputs with what our competition has, we can't compete in the market.
Typically, manufacturers on contract rates pay around $10 a gigajoule. Those relying on the spot market are now paying $40 a gigajoule after the Australian Energy Market Operator imposed temporary price caps. After spot prices skyrocketed, particularly in Melbourne's market after supply concerns.
There is a disconnect there, and this could be sorted by the federal government in the short term.
But business groups warn pulling the gas mechanism trigger will risk Australia's reputation.
They'd face a lot of intense questions and pushback diplomatically from our trading partners and our security allies.
Instead, there are calls for government handouts.
We would be talking big dollars, $3 to $5 billion of spending.
The manufacturing industry says that without an urgent response, businesses will close and consumers will pay more for everyday items at a time when cost of living pressures are piling up. The producer of fabric for the Australian cricket team's baggy green caps is now completely exposed to the spot market price after the company it bought gas from went bust.
If the international price of gas has gone through the roof because of a problem in Europe, that doesn't mean we should put our gas up through the roof.
Global factors affecting energy bills. Analysts say are set to drag on for years. Rihanna Whitson, ABC News.
Samoa has welcomed Australia's policy shift on climate change, saying the new government is aligning Australia closer to its Pacific neighbours. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has made a second visit to the region, witnessing the arrival of Australian medical supplies in Samoa and announcing a replacement maritime patrol vessel for the country. During a joint media conference, Samoa's Prime Minister hit back at China for trying to rush through a security and trade pact.
You cannot have regional agreement when the region hasn't met to discuss it.
I think it was a very wise intervention.
China's foreign minister has landed in his 7th island nation, Papua New Guinea, as he continues a whirlwind sweep of the Pacific. After 8 years in prison and 2 failed attempts to get parole, child sex offender Robert Hughes is set to be released. The former star of television sitcom Hey Dad was deemed to be at a below-average risk of reoffending and would be deported to the UK.
He's been behind bars since 2014, but today convicted child sex offender Robert Hughes has been granted parole. The disgraced Hey Dad actor was convicted of 10 sexual and indecent assault offences between 1984 and 1990. His victims were aged between 7 and 15. Hughes was sentenced to 10 years in prison and has been eligible for parole since mid-2020. Today, on his 3rd attempt, his parole application was approved. The state's parole authority has assessed the 73-year-old as a below-average risk, adding the offences took place in particular settings in which the offender abused his power and his position of trust. He no longer enjoys such power or trust. Hughes has always maintained his innocence.
Jenny, leave the room.
Last week, former co-star and on-screen daughter, Sarah Monahan, flew from the United States to watch his court appearance.
I wanted him to see me that I was there and that I wasn't scared anymore.
Robert Hughes renounced his Australian citizenship in 2019. That means when he's released from prison within the next 12 days, he will be deported back to the United Kingdom. Interpol has confirmed that Hughes will have to report to UK police within 3 days of arrival and annually thereafter. Harriet Tatum, ABC News.
In a case that's attracted worldwide attention, a jury in Virginia has found actor Johnny Depp was defamed by his ex-wife Amber Heard. There was also a partial victory for Ms Heard, who had filed a counterclaim. The verdict brings to an end a 6-week trial which saw the Hollywood stars level graphic allegations of domestic abuse at each other. North America correspondent Barbara Miller reports from Virginia.
It was the verdict many of those outside court had been hoping for.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Johnny Depp argued his ex-wife Amber Heard defamed him when she published a newspaper opinion piece saying she was a victim of domestic violence. And the jury agreed, ruling she acted with malice.
We, the jury, award compensatory damages in the amount of $10 million. As against Amber Heard, we, the jury, award punitive damages in the amount of $5 million.
The jury also found Ms Heard was defamed by a lawyer acting for Johnny Depp, awarding her $2 million in a countersuit. She didn't hang around to comment. Mr Depp wasn't in court for the verdict, leaving his lawyers to thank the jury.
Today's verdict confirms what we have said from the beginning, that the claims against Johnny Depp are defamatory and unsupported by any evidence.
We have justice today.
It has also showed people that men and women can be victims,
In a statement released later, Amber Heard said, "The disappointment I feel today is beyond words. It sets back the clock to a time when a woman who spoke up and spoke out could be publicly humiliated." From the UK, where he's been performing on stage, Johnny Depp released his own statement. "I am truly humbled. A new chapter has finally begun. Truth never perishes."
The jury here certainly seems to have picked a clear winner after this grueling case.
and that's Johnny Depp. What's not yet clear is whether Hollywood will come calling again. If not, this confronting case might just have ruined 2 careers. Barbara Miller, ABC News, Fairfax, Virginia.
Northern Territory Police have found the body of a woman believed to be the victim of a hit and run near Darwin. It follows days of searching after a human leg was found on the side of a busy road. 2 people have been arrested.
2 days after a human leg was found on the side of a busy highway on the outskirts of Darwin, police make another gruesome discovery.
Police attended a location in Jenkins Road, Virginia, where they located a deceased Aboriginal female. We believe this is the victim of the collision.
With help from the public, police yesterday identified a vehicle of interest. A 23-year-old Palmerston man was then questioned by police. He was arrested, the vehicle seized and a search warrant executed. Further investigations leading to the arrest of a 50-year-old woman and the seizure of a second vehicle from Winnelly.
It will be alleged that the 23-year-old male was the driver involved in the collision impacting the victim. It will be further alleged that the 50-year-old female has assisted him in removing the deceased to another location in an attempt to conceal the crime.
Police didn't say if the pair were related, and it's believed speed may have been a factor in the crash. This latest incident brings the road toll to 23 lives lost on the Territory's roads so far this year. And after a spate of alleged hit-and-run incidents, police are urging everyone on the roads to take extra care.
I'd like to remind people that if they are involved in a collision where they've hit something, there's a possibility that they've hit a person or animal. The humane thing to do is stop, offer assistance and report the matter.
Police have yet to formally identify the woman's body, but have been in contact with people believed to be her family. Mitchell Abram, ABC News, Darwin.
Earthquakes have hit southwestern China's Sichuan province, killing at least 4 people and injuring more than a dozen others. School children ducked for cover under their desks as a 6.1 magnitude quake rattled a county outside Chengdu City. 3 minutes later, another tremor struck kilometres away. Sichuan province is prone to earthquakes, with China's deadliest killing nearly 90,000 people in 2008. New data shows workers are returning to offices in capital cities around the country. Adelaide is leading the cities, just ahead of Brisbane, but working from home still remains a preference for many employees.
For the past 5 years, Medibank executive George Inglis has worked both in the office and at home.
I use work from home, particularly if I've got to concentrate on things or if I'm moving through some things where I've got to have some concentration.
Living in Melbourne during lockdowns, he realised he missed spending part of his week with colleagues.
It's actually the conversations that happen in the corridor, on the way to coffee, in the coffee line, you know, some of that sort of stuff. And I think that's the piece, that interpersonal piece, that we all found initially was a bit of a struggle.
According to data from the Property Council, workers are heading back to the CBD. Occupancy rates show a rise across the board, with Adelaide at 71% of pre-pandemic levels, Brisbane slightly ahead of Perth and Canberra at 64%, Sydney 55% and Melbourne 48%.
We had Omicron and then we had the floods, and then April there was a load of school holidays and public holidays. So now it very much feels like people are keen to get their lives back to normal, and that includes getting back into the office.
Workplaces that offer flexible arrangements say staff are choosing to adopt a hybrid approach.
We really feel like we're back in some respects of people being into the office. It's just not the same every day.
But to entice workers to leave home, some companies are moving to newer buildings, leaving older ones empty.
Some pain still to go in terms of secondary offices, and ultimately some of those may need to be repurposed or reinvested to position them as better offerings in the marketplace.
For Mr Inglis, he'll continue to adopt a hybrid model. Working remotely has enabled him to move to Brisbane and spend more time with family.
Not wearing a suit and tie every day is not a bad thing either.
Louisa Rebgetz, ABC News.
6 days out from State of Origin Game 1, both sides are ramping up their preparations for Wednesday's clash in Sydney. The Blues spent their day tapping into the mind of a UFC champion, while the Maroons had their first training run with all 17 members of the team.
Rolling into training Maroon style. After 2 COVID-19 interrupted seasons, the bikes are back. Queensland Origin camp traditions restored.
It's good to be around the boys and back in Queensland camp, and I haven't stopped smiling since, so I've been enjoying it.
That's because it's been a wretched few months for the 22-year-old Titans captain, whose side has managed just 3 wins from 12 matches.
I know it's hard when you lose, but I'm learning to make sure I get my job right for the team, and everyone will follow, with my actions.
Tino's got such high expectations of himself, and as a leader, he probably takes a lot of responsibility, but yeah, he's a big weapon.
Perhaps a change of jersey will be refreshing for the forward.
That's my game, is keep it simple, just run hard, tackle hard, and I can't wait to do that for Queensland.
It's a sentiment echoed by Harry Grant, who only entered camp yesterday after overcoming a bout of flu and a groin strain. He joked the Blues shouldn't take it as the mind games already starting.
Yeah, they can if they want. I don't think we really look too much into what sort of coming out of their camp down there, sort of just stay pretty focused on what we're doing here.
South of the border, the Blues spent the morning picking the brain of UFC champion and New South Welshman Alexander Volkanovski.
Well, that's what it was, have a chat to the guys, and it was about that headspace, that mentality.
The Blues under no illusions how crucial a win will be in Sydney Wednesday night.
You want to get off to a good start, obviously, because there's only 3 chances, and obviously there's another decider, possible decider in Queensland, so it's always tough to do that.
6 days until Game 1. Jessica Stewart, ABC News.
Mid-season draft number 1 pick Jai Cully says waking up as an AFL player is the best feeling in the world. The former Dandenong Stingray was selected by West Coast and will fly to Adelaide to join his teammates ahead of Saturday's clash with the Crows.
I had a really good message from Luke Shuey, which was pretty surreal, seeing you see him all on TV, and then now he's on my phone, so it's crazy.
And former North Melbourne defender Sam Durden was handed an AFL lifeline, selected by Carlton with the 13th pick.
First time round at North didn't work out how I would have liked, and fortunate enough just went back to Glenelg at the Bay, and absolutely loved my time there and was able to play some good footy, and now I've got this opportunity. It's I'm very fortunate.
Durden played 22 games across 4 seasons with the Roos before being delisted at the end of 2020. World number 1, Iga Swiatek, says she's disappointed in comments from the French Open tournament director, Amélie Mauresmo, that women's tennis has less appeal. A former player, Mauresmo, says men's matches have been scheduled on 9 of the 10 nights because they're more attractive to watch. Swiatek beat American Jessica Pegula in straight sets to reach the semi-finals and has won 33 matches in a row. The Polish player is yet to play a night match and disagrees with Mauresmo's stance.
Well, it is a bit disappointing and surprising because she was also in WTA. For every player, it's more convenient to play at normal hour, but for sure, I want to entertain.
The 20th seed, Marin Cilic, outlasted Russian Andrei Rublev in 5 sets to book a semi-final against Norway's Kasper Ruud. The Socceroos have beaten Jordan 2-1 in their last game before next week's World Cup qualifier against the United Arab Emirates. Australia fell behind in the 18th minute of the international friendly in Doha. A Craig Goodwin free kick was headed in by Bailey Wright, and it was 1-1 at half-time. The match winner came in the 68th minute.
Steered away by the keeper, the follow-up, and Mabil has scored. Australia in front, and it's Awa Mabil who gives the Socceroos a 2-1 lead.
If the Socceroos beat the UAE in Qatar next Wednesday, they'll face Peru for a spot in this year's World Cup. Netball Australia says its dire financial situation forced it to sell off the rights to the Super Netball Grand Final following a loss of more than $4 million last year. Super Netball confirmed Perth Arena would host the Grand Final on July the 3rd, saying a predetermined location would maximise attendance and viewers. It'll be the first time outside the pandemic seasons that the decider won't be hosted by the team that wins the major semi-final.
We will work our way through this. It just means that we sometimes have to make decisions that may not be the most popular decision, but we stand by the decisions that we make.
The deal has upset some clubs, with league leaders, the Melbourne Vixens, saying they're disappointed with the decision. Time now for a look at the weather. Here's Tyne Logan.
Hello. A surface trough has been delivering showers to the northwest and central districts and will continue to into tomorrow. Meanwhile, a high-pressure system has briefly eased that wintry blast for the southeast, but as it moves eastwards tomorrow, you'll see the first of a series of cold fronts push in behind it and sweep across southeastern Australia into your weekend. So let's take a look at Friday. You'll likely see showers and patchy rain through southern Queensland, reaching the southeast late in the day. Cooler than normal in the far south, but mostly sunny and mild elsewhere. New South Wales will be cool and wet, starting with a few showers in the west, spreading to the east later in the day. Also snow falling on the southern Alps above 1,200 metres. In Victoria, temperatures are barely making it past 10 degrees, with scattered showers in the northeast, southwest and central districts, and those winds freshening up during the afternoon. For Tassie, light showers about the north and west, increasing during the evening and extending into southern and central areas. Cloudy but dry for Hobart. Showers increasing in South Australia, with possible thunderstorms near western and southern coastlines during the morning. Temperatures-wise, generally cool. In WA's south, showers over southern parts of the southwest Land Division and Eucla coast, but mostly fine and mild elsewhere and across our north. Showers possible over the Simpson region and northeast Kimberley, and a hot and sunny dry season day for our top end.
Good on your time, thank you. And that is ABC Late News to the moment. I'm Michael Tetlow. Thanks very much for watching. As always, you can keep up to date with our news website, news.abc.net.au. Take care. Bye for now.
Nowhere to run.
Sports coaches can sexually abuse and pretty much get away with it.
There was this kind of, we don't want to wash our dirty linen in public.
I never told any of my friends what happened to me.
The journey to piece together a hidden past.
I'm almost nervous about what I will uncover.
Manipulative coaches are playing on the vulnerabilities of athletes who want to succeed at any cost.
The more I'm digging into my own past, the more I realise that this is ongoing.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
India, a powerhouse of culture, politics, diversity. And it's time to take a close-up look.
I'm Mark Fennell. Join me and a panel of guests every Monday night for a new show, India Now.
We'll bring you the key issues and latest news from the subcontinent, exploring everything that makes India and its neighbours the region to watch. We've got more than 1.8 billion stories to tell. India Now, Monday nights on ABC TV and ABC iView.
The story is I'm attempting to get Julian out of the shit.
Free Julian, free the press, free us all.
Ithaca, a fight to free Julian Assange. Tuesday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Report the facts.
Welcome to the program. Australia's new Labor government is facing the country's biggest energy crisis in decades. Bans on Russian oil and gas due to the invasion of Ukraine have sent the prices of oil and gas soaring, and coal too. After taking a drubbing in coalbelt seats at the 2019 election, this time Labor was able to win back some of its traditional voters. Dan Conifer takes a look at how those communities are feeling about the transition away from coal towards cleaner energy sources.
Muswellbrook is a strong mining community. There's a lot of mines around the town. There's a lot of people that rely on this mining community to make a living.
Mick Dobie is heading home after an early shift at a Hunter Valley coal mine. He's a proud unionist and stuck with Labor in 2019, even as 1 in 7 voters in the area abandoned the party.
I think the electorate didn't want to accept that renewables were coming. People are just scared of what they don't know. They're after someone that they think they can trust, and they're after someone that's going to level the playing field up.
Labor's new member for Hunter, 6'8" former miner Dan Repicoli, eked out a tiny swing to clinch victory.
I'd like to thank the people of the Hunter. There's 128,000 bosses I've just got, so thank you so much.
Dan's appealing. He's a shooter. He's an ex-coal miner. He knows what the people are going through.
Even though Mick concedes that coal's days are numbered, he wants the new local MP to defend jobs like his.
Protect the industries we've got, the power stations and the coal mines.
During the campaign, the coalition played on such fears with attack ads claiming coal mining and power plant job losses under Labor.
I think that scare campaigns work. There's no doubt about it. But it's difficult to reheat them, particularly if people have stopped listening to you. If you don't like the person trying to scare you, you know, it falls a bit flat, to tell you the truth.
At this election, thousands of voters in coal mining seats who naturally leaned towards Labor swung back to the ALP after abandoning the party in 2019. The new government had a clearer message on coal and climate change, promising stronger action to cut emissions and creating renewable energy jobs, while also backing coal workers and fossil fuel exports.
We have the best coal in the world here in the Hunter, and we need to make sure while people want to buy it, we supply it.
Such messages resonated beyond the Hunter. In Queensland, Labor didn't triumph in the state's 3 main coal mining electorates, but did achieve strong swings in its favour.
I'm actually quite amazed at what's happening.
Got 2 alumina refineries, a smelter, 3 LNG plants. We've got 2 coal exporting hubs here as well. I don't think you'd find a more concentrated industrial town in this country, sort of outside of Gladstone.
Tony Mills grew up in Gladstone, the biggest city in the Queensland seat of Flynn, and works at an alumina refinery there.
I'd always vote in Labor. My father always voted Labor, and we always believed that it was a party for the working man and the working family.
But he couldn't bring himself to vote Labor 3 years ago, when he felt they'd lost touch with workers like him.
Labor had very much an anti-coal sentiment about them. When you threaten people's livelihoods, it doesn't always sit well with you.
His protest vote in 2019 went to One Nation, but a couple of weeks ago he returned to Labor and its pro-coal candidate, Gladstone Mayor Matt Burnett.
Well, we're a Blackwater coal mine here, and as you can see, the job rocks.
Once they came out and said, we are for coal mining, it was enough for me to come back, yeah. It was almost like I was looking for a reason to come back.
There's a lot of anxiety and cynicism in those communities about who's got their back as the future kind of bears down on them. So the usual anxieties that Australians have about the future and jobs and cost of living are just much more acute in those communities.
I think the conversation has certainly changed. It's changed since the 2019 election, and there's been an even more significant shift in the last 12 months. People are wanting to actually have a meaningful conversation about transition.
Penny Allman-Payne is likely to be installed as a Queensland senator for the Greens after a career as a teacher in Gladstone. The city is home to one of the biggest fossil fuel export terminals in the country. But she says there's a growing acknowledgement in her community that coal and gas will decline and its economy needs to adapt.
We want to make sure that we have structures and things in place to make sure that workers are financially compensated or are given opportunities to retrain so that they can continue on contributing in a positive way as they have for decades to our region.
If you're going through a change in your working life, you're not caring about what's going on with the politics. You want to know what's going to happen for you and what the opportunities are going to be.
In the New South Wales Hunter region, they're already having conversations about the kind of future they want for their community.
In the renewable jobs of the future, we need to train the trainers before we can start training the students.
Tonight's forum's been organised by the Hunter Jobs Alliance, a group founded by unions and environmentalists to lobby for the area as its economy evolves.
What we need to see is the Hunter region being in the middle of this conversation and being front of the queue to make sure that we get those investments and those policies rolled out here.
Warwick Jordan leads the alliance. He says community groups can do some of the work, but he's calling for a dedicated government authority to navigate the changes ahead.
There's a lot of moving parts to managing a structural change in the economy, and what we see is that unless you have a level of coordination, things and people fall through the gaps.
Coal miner Mick Dobie reckons he'll be retired before the big changes hit. He just hopes his young co-workers can still be employed in the region.
You'd hope that you get a good paying job and a safe job. You want them to be able to move across to that next job, not be displaced and say, sorry, there's no work for you.
Australia's new Foreign Minister Penny Wong is on her third international trip since being sworn in, with a heavy focus on the Pacific amidst concerns about China's strategic ambitions in the region. She joined me from Samoa. Foreign Minister, you're in Samoa and you're heading to Tonga. What do you think Australia's Pacific neighbours are wanting from us currently?
Well, what they want is more energy. They're getting that from this government. But most of all, what they are seeking is a better position on climate, a more ambitious position on climate. So one of the reasons we've engaged so closely is we think it's important that the new government do what we said we'd do, which is to put more energy and more resources into the Pacific and to be very clear about our level of ambition on climate.
What are Pacific leaders saying to you about how they view China's overtures in the region?
Pacific leaders obviously understand the circumstances they face. I met with Prime Minister Fiame of Samoa today. I met with Prime Minister Bainimarama earlier in the week of Fiji. And I think it's very clear that these and other leaders understand the strategic circumstances they face and understand the importance of strong regional responses, strong regional institutions. What Australia is saying is we believe that regional security is the responsibility of the whole Pacific family, of which we are a part. And that's the approach we're taking, and that's the approach that many Pacific Island nations are reinforcing in their responses to us.
You would have had security briefings by now. You are on the ground in the region. Do you believe that China is actively working to expand its military presence in the region, that it wants bases and so on in the Pacific?
Look, China is much more active in this region. We know that. China is much more assertive in the world and in the broader Indo-Pacific region. We know that. So I think it's important not to simply focus on what China is doing, but to focus on what we're doing and how we work most closely with Pacific Island nations. I mean, one of the problems we saw under the last government is, a very problematic position on climate, which did infect our regional relationships. We saw a government that used to make jokes about Pacific leaders and their views about climate. So it's very important that Australia do what we're doing, which is to engage with the region, be upfront and clear about our position on climate, but as importantly, be clear about the importance of the Pacific family being responsible for the regional security.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is currently in Papua New Guinea. When are you likely to head there?
Well, the advice I've received is because they're in their pre-election period, it wouldn't be appropriate to go at this stage. I have spoken to the Foreign Minister, and I will be, as will, I'm sure, other senior ministers inside the Albanese government heading to PNG as soon as we're able to.
You and the Prime Minister are heading to Indonesia later this week. What message will you be taking there?
Well, Indonesia is such an important partner for Australia. It's critical to our security. It's a nation with whom we have long-standing ties, long-standing engagement. And as the region is being reshaped, it's very important we work closely with Indonesia on on the nature and the attributes of that region. And that's what we'll be focusing on in the discussions.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be with you.
It's almost 100 days since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in a bid to remove the nation's political leadership and install a pro-Moscow regime. The attack on Kyiv failed dismally, and so Russian President Vladimir Putin has centred a new war strategy on at least winning control of the eastern Donbass region. Michael Vincent reports.
When the Russian military attempted to drive into the Ukrainian capital Kyiv back in February, Moscow thought the invasion would be over in a matter of days. Instead, the conflict has now dragged into its 15th week. Russia's aggressive tactics galvanised the US and NATO to rapidly arm the Ukrainian military, which applied fierce resistance.
It's Russia that is attacking Ukraine, not the other way around. And simply put, the best way to avoid escalation is for Russia to stop the aggression and the war that it started. It's fully within its power to do so.
The front lines have changed vastly in 3 months. Russia has now regrouped and is targeting territory in the east of Ukraine. The conflict has largely devolved into a grinding artillery battle. Both sides are trading barrages over pockmarked farmland. Contested towns and cities are being decimated.
President Putin made a strategic mistake. He totally underestimated the strength and the will and the ability of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian armed forces, to defend themselves.
Russian soldiers were initially killed in their thousands as tanks ran out of fuel and infantry morale sank, making them easy targets for Ukrainian forces. Now Ukraine is reportedly suffering mass casualties as its conscripted territorial defence units are reportedly thrown into the front line with very basic training. Ukraine has repeatedly accused Russia of war crimes, including forcefully taking its children away.
The inevitability of punishment is a principle that Ukraine will teach Russia. But first of all, we must teach them on the battlefield that Ukraine will not be conquered, that our people will not surrender, and our children will not become the property of the occupiers.
President Putin has made limited appearances on Russian TV during the war. Even rarer, his appearances in public. It's raised regular questions from analysts about his health, ranging from cancer to a degenerative condition, concerns the Kremlin furiously rejects. Deep fears remain about how desperate President Putin may become if the Russian military cannot achieve some kind of victory.
The Russian soldiers who put their health and lives at risk for the sake of people and children of Donbass, for the sake of Russia, they are all heroes. Each of them puts their life in mortal danger going into this consciously, and we must treat them as heroes.
Anthony Beaver is a military historian who's been closely following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. His latest book is Russia, Revolution and Civil War, 1917 to 1921. Mr. Beaver, you've said that no country is as much a prisoner of its past as Russia. What do you mean by that?
Well, Russia has been trapped in its history, going all the way back even to the 13th century and the Mongol invasions, with its own ideas of national narrative and self-image and all the rest of it. The idea that it's continually surrounded by enemies and being attacked from all sides. And Putin has very much convinced himself that this is the case. He has a completely distorted view of history. And has convinced himself that somehow NATO is preparing to attack his country. And he's tried to persuade the whole of the citizenship of Russia that this is the case.
Is there anyone there in his circle who would ever actually speak up and say, well, this actually is not the case?
Unfortunately not. Some of them agree with him very, very strongly and share this same sort of Slav nationalist ideology. But no, not really. There is Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, who is very much of a crony of Putin's. But he's not somebody who really is able to tell the boss exactly what is going wrong.
We live in an era where you can entirely paralyse a country by knocking out the internet, for example, and mobile phone communications. Given that, why is Putin waging a war that involves tanks and guns and razing cities and so on?
Well, again, this is an obsession with the past. For Putin, the greatest moment of Russian history is the victory in 1945. Everything is directed in that particular sort of propaganda line. The 9th of May, you know, whether it's the question of the tanks railing across Red Square and all the rest of it, Putin is obsessed with these symbols of victory in 1945. And this actually has been one of the problems in the way they've been fighting the war, the way he has been micromanaging it. Ironically, he's been much more like Hitler, who was even controlling little movements of small pockets of troops, unlike Stalin, who by that stage of the war had given the generals their heads. And I think this has been a real disadvantage for the Russian military.
But what are his motivations?
Well, his motivations really are the restoration of not just the Soviet Union, but really the old Russian Empire. All of the symbols around him actually are Tsarist symbols rather than Soviet ones. I mean, in that great white hall in the Kremlin with the long, ridiculous long table where he interrogates people, he is surrounded by 4 statues of Tsars. All of the symbols on his palace on the Black Sea are the double-headed eagle. So Putin's view is of imperial Russia even more than of the Soviet Union.
In your new book, Russia, Revolution and Civil War, you refer regularly to morale during the Russian Civil War in the early part of the 20th century and the role it played from soldiers to civilians. From what we hear of what's going on in Ukraine, Ukrainian citizens are united and motivated, whereas Russian troops are not. Can something like morale make a significant difference when a tiny country like Ukraine is so outgunned militarily by Russia?
Yes, it can. When you have troops who have been badly treated, and this was also the case of Red Army troops during the Second World War, and it ended with a number of mutinies right at the end of the war. We're seeing mutinies again, but we're also seeing a repetition of the brutality of Russian troops, and this has raised a number of debates recently on to what degree, as one writer recently said, you know, where does this casual savagery come from? And in a way, the answer is it goes back to those Mongol invasions and the idea that the only way of waging war is through conspicuous cruelty. And there is a totally casual attitude towards looting, rape, the destruction of civilian houses and even the killing of civilians. And we've been seeing this in Ukraine, and this is why the Ukrainians, I think, are resisting as desperately as they are. And I think that that is why, even if Russia manages to occupy more territory, it is going to find itself facing a desperate guerrilla campaign.
Intelligence agencies and Ukrainian allies did not predict President Zelensky turning out to be the singular figure that he has been. How do you account for his unexpected steal?
Well, I think people have slightly underestimated Zelensky, thinking of him as a comic actor. Zelensky was much more than a comic actor. He was a brilliant scriptwriter too. And this is where I think it's emerged how incredibly clever he has been in handling his relations across the world with leaders, political leaders and others. But also, he is one of those rare people in history who suddenly emerge unexpectedly at a moment. You know, cometh the hour, cometh the man. And Zelensky has certainly proved to be the man.
As you say, history often delivers the unexpected, and that's about the only given. In that context, how do you think that this invasion of Ukraine is going to end?
I think that I don't think anybody is in a position really to predict that. I always find it slightly ironical the way that historians working on the past are always asked about the future. It can come out in several different ways, but I think one thing is certain. When people are now talking about off-ramps of giving Putin a way to back out, I don't think that will be the case. I think that the trouble is that Ukraine cannot allow itself to be in a position where Putin can agree to withdraw and then actually come straight back in again. The old Napoleonic idea of, you know, pull back, ready to jump again. And Putin has proved that he cannot be trusted for a moment on any deal or on any agreement. So I fear that the war is going to grind on, certainly into the winter, maybe even into next year.
Anthony Beaver, pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Basketball is growing in popularity in Tasmania, where fans still can't believe their NBL team's fairy tale debut season. The basketball success comes as Tasmania makes its final push for Aussie rules teams. Ellen Coulter reports.
Game over. Love it. Great for Tasmania. You can make your dreams a reality if you believe in them. Adams to tie it up. Oh my. Unbelievable from Josh Adams.
I certainly think it was out of the ordinary to see what Tasmania did this season in the NBL in its first season. A smallish franchise within the competition, a bunch of players that were pulled from all sorts of different paths, and an American coach who just created a culture. It truly was an extraordinary tale.
When Clint Steindl arrived in Tasmania to play for the Jack Jumpers in their first NBL season, expectations weren't particularly high.
I mean, we had a lot of things going against us, and the biggest thing was the infancy of the club and the infancy of this group being together.
But the Jack Jumpers stunned the basketball world, overcoming injuries and an average start to march all the way to the grand final in May.
And throughout that final series, it was electric.
March, 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 march.
Jack Jumpers fever swept Tasmania.
To be able to drive through the city or go down to a local basketball stadium or a school clinic and see kids wearing your jersey with your name and your number on the back, it's incredible.
Even as Premier, I don't think I've ever seen in 54 years of living in Tasmania something that's really so quickly united the state.
David Bartlett has been one of basketball's big believers in Tasmania. The former Premier runs a basketball academy. He's also worked with one of the 3 second-tier teams rolling out school basketball clinics.
What they did was build this huge groundswell of support for basketball that the Jack Jumpers have then come in and ignited.
So we're going to go pound, crossover, pound between the legs. Pound, crossover, pound.
My favourite sport at the moment would definitely be basketball. Yeah, it's great to have a Tasmanian team though.
2 more!
They're seeing it on TV, they're seeing the excitement of them making the finals and thinking maybe they could play for the Jack Jumpers further on down the track.
As basketball takes off, it's making inroads into a state that's previously been preoccupied with another sport.
Picks it up, round the corner, finally gets the goal.
They're getting the jump on the AFL. The AFL has had an opportunity to go into Tasmania for a long time and has been through a period of inaction.
Hello and welcome live to the MCG. We're in the commentary box ahead of...
Sports commentator Alistair Nicholson has watched how quickly basketball has been able to mobilise in his home state, while the AFL has spent decades debating whether Tasmania should have a footy team. At the same time, grassroots men's football has struggled.
It's been happening right across the state. The teams are folding, leagues are struggling, and participation numbers in critical age groups are not where they used to be.
I think we have been forgotten. I think the development of football, the right amount of coaches, certainly at junior level, hasn't been furnished enough, and I think AFL itself in Melbourne have got to take some blame for that.
Tenor. Great mark there to Eade. That was a...
Rodney Eade is one of Tasmania's great football exports, playing more than 250 games in the 70s and 80s before going on to a long coaching career. He would have loved to have played for or coached a Tasmanian team.
And I think Tasmania's been a football heartland, and I think taken for granted that it's always going to be a football heartland.
In the absence of its own team, Tasmania has been spending about $8 million a year on deals with North Melbourne and Hawthorn to play a handful of games in Tasmania.
Just what the Kangaroos needed.
But the fight for a Tasmanian AFL and AFLW team is coming to a head. Tasmania has now launched a public campaign it's calling The Last Push in an effort to get the AFL to back a local team.
Now the time has come to unleash this spirit on the great game.
The state-funded task force behind the bid has enlisted big names to promote it. The task force has a matter of weeks to convince the AFL that Tasmania deserves a footy team ahead of a vote by club presidents in August. A non-binding bid put forward by Tasmania asks the AFL for a 10-year licence and offers $150 million in state funds for a team and facilities.
The AFL is at risk in Tasmania. The presidents would be on the wrong side of history if they voted this down.
Tasmania's Premier has defended the need to stump up taxpayer money.
Well, we're not going to, sell the family silver, if I can put it that way, for an AFL team. That is a very good offer in my view, but of course an offer that we can afford.
There is concern among some clubs that AFL resources could end up spread too thinly if Tasmania joins the league.
We cannot, as a sport, as an industry, afford a 19th franchise under any circumstances. The money is not there. The depth of playing group is not there.
If the AFL believe it to be attainable and sustainable, well, then it's their obligation to sell it to the presidents.
In a statement, the AFL said participation numbers in Tasmania have stabilised after a challenging period and the number of female players is surging. It's continuing to work with Tasmania on a potential AFL team. After a stellar first season, there are no plans for the Jack Jumpers to slow down.
I think they all can coexist, but the AFL needs to look really closely at what is happening down there and the number of kids who are taking basketballs and wearing Jack Jumpers singlets and going off to games and that type of thing, because this is a football heartland and the AFL risks losing it.
You can find a full statement from the AFL on our website. See you again on Monday. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Chill this winter on ABC iView.
Oh, wow.
With a world of great docos.
Who is this guy?
He's so good, believe in me.
Malakuta needs to advocate for what we want.
We know best about what we need. If he goes down, so will journalism.
5, 6, 7.
These hills are alive with creativity.
You feel like you've forgotten to get dressed if you go out in the paddock without a dog.
Stream for free on ABC iView. Nowhere to run.
Sports coaches can sexually abuse and pretty much get away with it.
There was this kind of, we don't want to wash our dirty linen in public.
I never told any of my friends what happened to me.
The journey to piece together a hidden past.
I'm almost nervous about what I will uncover.
Manipulative coaches are playing on the vulnerabilities of athletes who want to succeed at any cost.
The more I'm digging into my own past, the more I realise that this is ongoing.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Look, it's a flashy gimmick to market the new season of Growin'.
This is genius.
great advertising.
Featuring your favourite advertising experts.
Collect us all.
Fully customisable to fit your personality. And they'll sing your favourite advertising jingles.
No, we won't, but we will deconstruct the way that brands are trying to sell to you.
It's the new and improved Gruen.
It's the same show as ever. Now let me out of here.
Gruen, available